Good evening, my spookies. Tonight we're throwing the map in the glove box and heading for the places nobody wants to stop after dark. You know the kind, a stretch of road where the gas gauge drops a little early. A town that looks abandoned until you notice something watching from a window. A cabin trail in the Ozarks where the woods seem hungry. A gas station glowing in the middle of nowhere, like the last safe place on Earth, right up until you realize it absolutely is not. These are the stories that live between highway lines and tree roots, where one detour, one breakdown, one wrong job, or one bad shift can send your whole life skidding sideways into a ditch. So settle in, lock the doors, and maybe don't trust any place with a hand-painted warning sign out front. And while we're riding into the dark together, make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast app, because every single Wednesday, there's a brand new scary story right here at Weekly Spooky. But now, I guess it's time to start the engine, roll up the windows, and hit the open road.
Strikeout by Morgan Moore. "How much longer, Dad?" Callie Jensen asked. "For today or in general?" he replied. I guess both," the 11-year-old answered. "Well, we'll probably stop in an hour or so for the night at a hotel. Then tomorrow it shouldn't be much longer to Grammy's," he told her. "Awesome," Callie responded. Her father smiled at her eagerness. Callie and her father were on their way to her grandmother, or, as she had always called her, Grammy's house in Maryland. It was a tradition they had kept every spring since Callie could remember. She and her father loved baseball, and the Baltimore Orioles were their shared favorite team. Her name, in fact, came from one of their more storied players, in Cal Ripken Jr. Callie's dad insisted on using the name in any way, shape, or form for his firstborn. So when he and her mom learned they were having a little girl, they decided on Callie. Currently, they were nearing the halfway point of their trip. Callie and her family lived in Ohio, which meant she and her father would trek through the Buckeye State, down through West Virginia, and finally, Maryland. Callie's dad usually considered West Virginia the halfway point, unless they got up super early where they would do the trip in one go. Knowing they would be stopping soon brought joy to Callie, as they usually stopped in the same town, known as Morgantown, and almost always either went to a diner near the hotel or ordered pizza. Then it would be breakfast at the hotel in the morning, and then onward to Grammy's, where, save for some eating out, they dined on her grandmother's homemade cooking, with her chocolate chip pancakes being Callie's favorite. She could almost taste them. Not to mention opening day for the Orioles. Callie returned her attention to the book she was reading, her normal way of passing the time on the drives, unless she wanted to break out her Game Boy Advance and replay one of the Pokemon games for the umpteenth time. If she had her way, Callie would have her mitt and ball with her and pass the time by lightly tossing it and catching it. But her dad had vetoed that since last year, when she nearly caused him to have an accident. The mitt and ball, along with her bat, would have to wait. Callie felt her eyes start to grow heavy as she continued to read. The heaviness soon overcame her, and they began to close. Once fully closed, she was out like a light. Her eyes shot open as her body was jolted away. Her eyes danced around before catching a glance at the time on the radio deck. 6:30 p.m. She turned her attention to her dad, who was cursing under his breath. "Daddy?" she asked in shocked fright. "I don't know what I hit, but 2 of our tires just blew out," he told her. "What do we do?" Callie questioned. "Well, normally when you have a flat tire, you just change it. But I don't have 2 spares, so..." He trailed off. "So then what do we do?" she asked, with fear creeping into her tone more and more. "Well, we're not close to a town yet," he responded as his eyes looked at their surroundings. "We're in trouble?" Callie asked. Her father does not answer. Instead, he keeps his eyes scanning the area. Finally, a small smile appears on his mouth, and he snaps his fingers. "There we go," he exclaims in hopeful joy. Callie turns her attention to where her father was looking. Shortly up ahead was what looked like the start of a driveway. "Does that lead to somebody's house?" she asked. "We'll find out soon enough, honey. Either way, it'll lead somewhere that will hopefully find people and can plan our next steps from there," he answered. "Will we make it with the tires?" Callie questioned, as her nostrils became filled with the smell of burning rubber. "I hope so, sweetie," he said. Callie's father carefully turned the car leftwards into the opening and began driving up the path slowly. While night was not far behind, the sun was starting to lower as dusk took over. The path winded up part of a mountain whose trees, along with the slowly setting sun, left little light for them to use. Finally, they arrived at an open gate. The father and daughter rolled down their windows and poked their heads out. Callie spotted an old metal sign dangling from one of the gate doors. She squinted her eyes to read it. "Keep out," she said. "What was that, sweetie?" her father asked. "There's a sign that said keep out." "I think that means we shouldn't go in anymore, Daddy," Callie told her father. "The gate is open, though. Besides, even if they don't necessarily want strangers around, we do have a valid reason on our side. We need help," he explained. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Callie questioned. "It's either this or pulling over on the road," he answered. With that, her father drove through the gates as he switched on the headlights. The pair continued forward as the large house came into view via the headlights. Callie's father slapped the steering wheel in excitement. Once close enough, Callie's dad pulled to a stop and turned off the truck. "Dad?" Callie said. "What is it, honey?" he returned. "I don't have a good feeling about this," she told him. "How come?" he asked. "It just doesn't feel right going somewhere we shouldn't. Besides," she started as she looked at the surroundings. "This place gives me the creeps," she finished. Her father smiled at her. "I know, hun. It's a new place and we're in a bad spot. But at the end of the day, I like to believe that people are good and will help their fellow man. Even if the people who live here are angry that we pulled in, surely they'll understand why. Come on, let's find out what fate has in store for us," he said. On that note, her father swung his door open and exited the car. Hesitating for a moment, Callie took some deep breaths before getting out of the car and joining her father. She grasped and curled her hand around his, prompting a smile from him and a ruffle of her hair in response. The father and daughter made their way across the grounds. The duo ascended up a small set of steps onto the wooden patio of the house. At the door, Callie's father took a deep breath, put on his best friendly smile, and knocked on the door. Nothing. He waited for a moment before knocking again, a bit harder. Still nothing. Frowning a bit, Callie's father banged on the door with his whole fist. Not 2 seconds later, the door swung open, violently.
"Go away!"
a grisly voice commanded. Callie and her dad looked at the man in front of them. He was tall and burly, with a full and bushy black beard and head of dark hair that looked messy and greasy. He was dressed in jeans, a plain-colored t-shirt, an opened-up work shirt, and large boots. Most importantly, and jarringly, to the father and daughter, was the shotgun he held in his hands. "Hello," Callie's dad started. "My name is Nathan Janum. This is my daughter Callie. We were on our way to visit some family when 2 of our tires blew." He points to their car. "I know it's late and probably not what you wanted to have at your doorstep this time of night, but we really need help. My cell phone is close to dead. I do have some cash, though, if you'd be willing to help us." He finished as his hand slides into his pocket and withdraws his wallet.
"I don't care. Get!"
the man told them with growing menace. Callie shuddered at the look in his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm just a father in a bad predicament with his daughter. I promise if you let me use your phone, me and her will get out of your hair as fast as possible," Callie's dad said. The man held up and aimed the shotgun right at Callie's father. "I don't give a shit who you are and what you want. Get off my property now. Last warning," he told her father, directly before giving a look at Callie that made her skin crawl. Her father gulped and then sighed and took another breath. "Listen, buddy, I'm not falling for this tough guy who lives out in seclusion in the wilderness crap. We need help. The least you can do if you won't help us is tell us who will." Her father all but ranted. The man's response was a simple one. He raised his aim, pulled on the trigger of the shotgun, and blew the head of Callie's father right off. Blood and brain matter splattered all over the porch, as well as the man and Callie. She turned and looked to where her father had stood a moment prior, only to find him splayed out on the ground with his head blown open and a messy pile of flesh and blood and brain. Callie wanted to scream, but couldn't find the ability to do so due to the shock. Her eyes returned to the man who was loading 2 fresh slugs into the shotgun and locking it into place. He pointed it at her torso. Before she knew what was happening, she jumped off the porch and started running across the grounds. A shot thundered out from the gun, and she saw the ground off to her side erupt. He missed. She kept her pace up, unsure of where to go or how far the man would give chase. Another blast from the gun echoed through the air, and Callie felt the ground right behind her at her feet blown apart. The impact on the ground near her caused her to stumble and then fall forward, slamming face down into the dirt. She felt like she had been punched square in the face and was dizzy. Her eyes fluttered open and stared ahead. Callie became grateful that she landed where she did. Only a few inches away from where she fell was a snap trap. If she had kept running or fell a bit farther, either her foot or her face would have been crushed. She got to her feet slowly and risked a look behind her. The man was off of the porch and started to run toward her. Unsure of what was the best option, Callie looked down and around the ground. In her search, she found an old beer bottle and picked it up. Better than nothing, she told herself. Callie turned to face the oncoming threat, and when he was just close enough, as he started to raise the gun, she reared back her arm and threw the bottle like she was trying to strike out a player to win a game. The bottle collided with the man's face and shattered. He rubbed and picked at his visage to remove any glass that might have embedded itself in his flesh. Using the opportunity to her advantage, Callie sprinted past the man and kept running past the house towards its backyard. Behind her, all she heard was the man.
I'm gonna kill you, you little bitch!
Callie's eyes darted around the backyard. Her options for a hiding spot were not the best. There was a shed, but surely the man would look there first, and it was possible that it was locked. She considered trying the back door, but who knew what horrors were inside? Callie considered hiding under the raised back porch, climbing a tree, or to simply keep running. Then her eyes landed on a doghouse, which looked to be big and dug into a decently deep level. Callie sprinted towards it and slid into the opening. The space inside was tight, but was indeed deep enough to allow her to partially crawl out of view. Lying in the dirt, the tears finally came as Callie processed the last few minutes. Her father had died. No, was slaughtered before her eyes. Her white and black baseball shirt was covered in his blood, and she could feel the wetness of brain matter on her face and in her hair. "Daddy," she cried in her head. She dared not to speak and give away her hiding spot. Callie shook her head. "Get it together. You need to keep it together if you want to survive," she told herself. How, though, was the question. She didn't know fully why she had even chosen to run to the backyard. Her best guess was fear that if she left the property, that the man would pursue her and most likely get her. After all, he lived out here and most likely knew the land better than anybody. Not to mention, it was possible he did leave the property thinking she may have gone back down the mountain and could have closed and locked the gate. She thought about running past the backyard, but was unsure if and when it would stop. It seemed plausible the man might have another gate or fence somewhere behind his house. In her mind, that left one option: the car. Callie knew her father had the keys with him when they went to the door, most likely in one of his pockets. The issue, though, was both being able to get to them before being caught, and the fact that 2 tires were unusable. Callie didn't know much about cars, but she knew driving on blown-out tires leads to driving on rims, which is an even worse problem. Add to that the growing darkness and her inability to drive, which meant it was most likely not a good idea. A few seconds later, though, a fresh idea entered Callie's head and brought a smile to her face. Her baseball stuff was in the trunk of the car, which meant her baseball bat was in there as well. If she could get the keys to the car, Callie could unlock the trunk, get her bat, and have a weapon. True, she knew a baseball bat, especially a wooden one, wasn't the best choice against a shotgun, but it was something. Besides, she told herself, if you could outrun and dodge 2 shots, maybe you can do it again. When he would go to reload, you can go up to him and start beating him with the bat. Her smile turned to a grin as she envisioned getting revenge against the man. It was a risky plan, but the only feasible one Callie could think of. She started to crawl out of the doghouse. She figured it might be best to run around the house the opposite way she came into the backyard, in case the man was waiting for her. Callie considered crawling on the ground to do so, but if there was one spring trap on the premises, there would likely be more. This man clearly took any and all precautions to keep people away. Exiting the doghouse, Callie slowly rose to her feet when a thought occurred to her. There was a doghouse, but there didn't seem to be a dog. Unless... Foss! The man's voice roared. Callie turned her attention to the back porch and saw the man standing there. Next to him was a dog, a cane corso. The moment it heard its master speak, it shot forward like a speeding train towards Callie. The plan to go around the house vanished as Callie began sprinting for her life back the way she came, with the dog in pursuit behind her. How am I going to get the keys and get away before the dog even catches me? The answer was simple. I'm just going to have to. Callie rounded a corner into the front of the grounds and turned to the porch. She ran towards it with the dog barking right behind her. Callie jumped up the small steps and slid to a crash against the wall. She shook it off and hustled to her father and checked his pockets. The keys were gone. The man must have taken them, she said to herself. Before she could think any further, the dog jumped onto her, snarling. Callie remembered when a police officer visited her class and explained to them what to do if a dog ever attacked you. Normally, it would be to stay still, but this was no ordinary dog. Callie shook her body around back and forth to gather any momentum she could. Feeling confident enough, Callie rolled her body to the side and brought the dog onto its side. She then gave it a hard punch to its chest, which elicited a yelp and a momentary retreat from the dog. Callie jumped to her feet. If I want in the trunk, I'll have to use the hatch in the car. She hoped and prayed the man hadn't locked it as she leapt off the porch and ran towards the car. She pulled hastily on the driver's side door and was relieved to find it unlocked. Callie quickly got inside and shut the door. A moment later, the dog jumped against the window, barking fiercely. Callie screamed as she searched for the right lever to pull, pulling on all of them just to be sure. Hearing the trunk click and pop open, Callie breathed a sigh of relief. Then she stared out the front of the car and found the dog standing by the man, his shotgun aimed right at the vehicle. The next thing she knew, there was a bang, and the windshield shattered. Screaming in terror, Callie crawled from the driver's seat into the back. There she opened a door and crawled out. Staying on the ground, she made her way to the back of the car, then moved onto her knees. Gripping the latch of the trunk, she pushed it open the rest of the way. And there it was. Her baseball bat. She grinned as she pulled it out of the trunk and wielded it like a sword. Okay, Callie. Time to do either the bravest or dumbest thing in your whole life, she said to hype herself up. Callie stood up and walked around the car to find the man and the dog. The man had the shotgun aimed at her. He eyed the baseball bat in her hands, adjusted his aim, and fired. The bat blew apart in Callie's hand, sending wood all over the ground, as well as into the flesh of her hands, arms, and face. She fell to the ground, ears ringing from the force of the blast, and screamed in agony. She felt more pain than she could have ever imagined. "Foss!" the man commanded again. She heard the snarl, but couldn't find the strength to move. A moment later, the dog was on her and elicited fresh screams from her throat as it ripped and teared into her thigh. With what strength she had, Callie beat on its head to no avail. Her defense only caused the dog to tighten its hold. It shook its head, causing more damage. Through growingly hazier eyes, Callie turned her head and saw that in her right hand she was still gripping the shattered and splintered remains of the bat. She looked at the dog. "Dear God, I'm sorry." In one furious movement, she plunged the remains of the bat into the neck of the beast. She twisted it as she pulled it out and watched blood flow out of the wound. "Barbus!" the man screamed. Almost as if the first stab filled her with more energy, Callie screamed as she repeatedly thrust the broken bat into the dog's throat and its torso. Her body became covered in its blood as life quickly drained from it. Callie shoved the dog off of her and slowly stood up, her body shaking from shock. She looked to where the man was and saw him running at full speed toward her. "You have one chance, Callie," she told herself. The moment the man was in range, Callie shrieked and pushed her body forward and plunged the remains of the bat into the man's hip. He howled in pain and in response dropped the shotgun as he staggered back a few inches. Not wasting a moment, Callie picked up the shotgun and aimed it at the man. She watched as he pulled out the bat and threw it to the ground. His eyes moved to her, and a grin formed across his bearded mouth. "What you gonna do with that, bitch?" he asked tauntingly. "I'm going to shoot you just like you did my dad," Callie retorted. The man's grin widened. "Really now? Sure you have enough strength to do it?" "Uh-huh," she answered, knowing her strength was indeed fading fast. "Are you sure it's loaded?" the man questioned. Callie responded. The man chuckled. "What makes you so sure it's loaded? After all, you were in La La Land getting mauled by my dog. So how do you know if I ever loaded it again?" Of course you did," Callie says back to him, but admits in her head that the man raises a viable point. "Really now? You bet on it being loaded?" he taunts. "Yeah," she squeaks out. "Well, what about this one?" the man said as he reached behind him and brandishes a pistol, aiming it at Callie. You have another gun?" Callie questioned in genuine surprise. "Course I do," Be prepared to protect yourself and whatnot." The man answered with a menacing glee. Silence fell between the two, with only the sound of nature filling the space between them. They stare each other down, each one waiting for the other to make the first move. "So, you really want to bet your life on that shotgun being loaded?" the man asked. Finding she had little strength left to speak, Callie nodded her head to say that she does. "Well, I guess we'll find out then," the man said. They let silence fall over them once more, as they listened to crickets and other nocturnal sounds. Their fingers each squeeze and then pull back on their respective triggers. There was a bang and the odor of gun smoke as it filled the night. I Was Sent to a Small Town Where Strange Things Were Happening by Michael Kelso. Even thinking about retelling this story has made me the most afraid I've ever been in my life. I suppose if I keep it bottled up, I'll go insane. God knows the security company isn't talking. I feel like if I don't warn people and they go there. All right. If I'm telling the story, then I'd better back up a bit. It started a little over a month ago. I work for a security firm that guards projects all over the country. I'm sort of a specialist. It seems like if there's some weird stuff happening at a site, I get called in. I'm not sure why. Maybe my ex-military background, or maybe the fact that, well, we'll get to that. This place up in New England was having some trouble. A local firm was remodeling an old church when workers suddenly started quitting. No one seemed to have a good reason why they didn't want to work there anymore. So, guess who got the call to come in and straighten things out? Driving up there gave me the most profound feeling of being alone I've ever had. And mind you, I've sat watch in caves, foxholes, ditches, some of the most God-forsaken places on the planet, all by my lonesome, and never did I ever feel as soul-crushingly alone as driving up that little 2-lane road that was the only sign of humanity, as the trees seemed to close in on me from every side. As unnerving as that was, it was nothing compared to pulling into the little town where the church was. It was like the nightmare scene from a B-horror movie. I guess arriving at night in the middle of a rainstorm didn't help much. I pulled in beside the only vehicle I saw and ran inside the hotel that looked like a saloon out of an old western. I barely got the door closed when there was a light and a gun shoved in my face. "Who the hell are you?" said a man from somewhere behind the glare of a flashlight. "Jones," I said, slowly raising my hands. "I was called in to help out with your worker problem." The light lowered, but the gun stayed. "What company do you work for?" "Sentinel Security." I saw the man relax a little, but mostly I was happy that he lowered the gun. In the best of times, a gun in a situation is less than ideal. All kinds of accidents can happen. I've seen many innocent bystanders fall victim to contagious gunfire. The man stepped over to a table and sat. As I looked around the room, I was surprised at how much it looked like a movie set from an old western, right down to the lit lanterns on the tables and hanging from the rafters. He beckoned me over and I sat across from him. "Judging by the welcome, I'm guessing the workers aren't the only ones who are spooked," I said. He looked at the gun, then laid it on the table. He seemed to be in his 40s or 50s, but there was a tiredness in his eyes. He looked weary and haggard. Truth be told, I'm not even sure a gun would do any good. Maybe you should tell me when the trouble started. He looked at me. I could see worry tugging at his eyes. Your contract's open, right? I nodded. Which means you have to finish the job or you don't get paid, right? I nodded again. He looked me over for a long moment, then sat back, drained his glass of amber-colored liquid, and sighed. I bought this town a while back, he started. Recently, with the passing of my wife, I decided I needed to throw myself into a project to keep me busy. I wanted to revitalize this town and turn it into a tourist attraction. I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded in recognition, but never said another word about her. Things were going along smoothly, he said. The buildings you see have all been restored. They look good. You should have seen them when we started, he scoffed. They were falling apart. No one had lived here for years. That's why I was able to buy the whole place for next to nothing. I'm thinking that's not the only reason. Yes, he said, as a haunted look passed through his eyes. We saved the church for last because it needed the most work. But once they started remodeling is when things began to happen. Things? It wasn't much at first. Shovels and saws would go missing. Tools would be left in fine order at night only to be in complete disarray in the morning. For a while, the workers blamed each other, saying there was a prankster among them. But that wasn't the case? Oh, how I wish it was. I waited for a long moment for him to continue. We found the first body shortly after that, he said so quietly I barely heard him. Of a worker? He nodded. Dead? He nodded again. Why didn't you stop everything and leave? Because it was already too late, he said. We had disturbed it. Disturbed what? He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. He shook his head and looked away. For a moment, I could swear I saw a tear run down his cheek. I'm sorry, he said, rubbing his palms on his face. Let me take you to your room and we'll discuss this further in the morning. My curiosity wanted him to finish the story, but it seemed like his weariness had been amplified by alcohol. I followed him as he carried the lantern up the stairs to the first floor and opened it for me. He handed me the light and told me the bathroom was across the hall, if I needed it. I'll be here bright and early in the morning to give you the $1 tour, he said, sounding more like a host. Aren't you staying here tonight? His eyes flashed genuine fear. Not here, he said. I'll be back in the morning. I looked around the comfortable-looking room, trying to decide what was so wrong with it, as he stepped to the door. Oh, by the way, he said, stopping at the doorway. Don't bother with your cell phone. There's no signal up here. I glanced down at my phone, and when I looked up, he was gone. I picked up the lantern and stepped to the doorway, but I didn't hear him leaving. You would have thought someone walking out on the hardwood floor would make some noise, but it was silent. The only noise I heard was the rain pelting against the windows. Since I was already in the hallway, I decided to check out the bathroom. I walked a short distance down the hall and found it to be functional and clean, but nothing extraordinary. While I was there, I used the toilet and washed my hands, then went to my room and got my toiletries kit to brush my teeth. Carrying a lantern around was a little disconcerting. I've had to deal without electricity many times before, but that wasn't what was bothering me. The shadows from the lamp danced all over, giving the impression of others in the room with me. It's strange because I've never had that feeling before. Shadows were always just shadows. I was trained to be cautious of who could be hiding in the shadows, but not the shadows themselves. I finished up my bedtime routine and settled in to sleep. There wasn't much of anything else to do, so might as well get some rest. One of the things I was taught early on in my career was that any time you get a chance, Rest. You never know when the next chance will come. I laid down on the comfortable bed and did some relaxation exercises. Before I knew it, I was asleep. I woke with a start, not knowing why. It was pitch black in the room. Instead of panicking, I touched my watch to illuminate it and found my phone. Turning on the flashlight and lighting the lamp helped me get my bearings, but still didn't tell me why I was awake. I sat there for a long moment. Then I heard it. There was a loud clanking sound coming from somewhere outside. Sleeping in my clothes when on a job was a habit I'd gotten into when I first started doing private security, another carryover from the military. I slipped out of bed and into my boots, then strapped on my utility belt, then checked to make sure my sidearm was loaded. I turned off the phone's flashlight and grabbed a small utility flashlight from one of the pouches on the belt. For the moment, I holstered the gun and explored with just the flashlight. This could be nothing. I didn't want to go in gangbusters just to find some kids playing around or a worker who came in early. I double-checked my watch. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. Seemed like an odd time for a worker to come in, but stranger things have happened. Working my way down the stairs quietly, I double-checked the bar room. It was empty. Opening the door, I had the strangest feeling that something was wrong. Nothing seemed to be out of place. It had stopped raining and I stepped out into the street to find a light layer of fog. Looking up and down the street, I heard the noise again. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the church. Leading with the flashlight, I started in that direction. There seemed to be a slight orange glow coming from the inside of the building the closer I got. The beam of my flashlight made the air around me glow. It made me feel like I was giving my position away. I fought back the feeling. This was a little town in Vermont, not an active war zone. I had to be cautious but also temperate with non-lethal actions. The church loomed in front of me. It seemed much larger up close. I climbed the steps and reached for the doorknob when a loud crack sounded behind me. I whipped around, shining my flashlight at everything. But there was nothing there. As I was looking back, I noticed a light in the window of my room. I must have left the lantern lit. As I looked, I saw the light dim for an instant and then get brighter, almost as if someone had walked in front of it. The temperature felt like it was in the lower 70s, but that didn't keep a chill from running down my spine. Someone was curious to know who I was. From years of experience, I've found that it's never good if someone wants to find out who you are, but doesn't want to do it face to face. That would be something to deal with when I got back to my room. For now, there was a church to explore. I got the feeling that someone was trying to distract me from entering. I reached the top of the stairs and turned the knob, but nothing happened. It didn't feel like it was locked. It was almost as if someone was on the other side, holding the knob. I turned as hard as I could, and finally it gave, and the door opened, dragging me inside and nearly knocking me to the floor. Regaining my balance, my hand hovered over my gun, expecting to see someone doing something they weren't supposed to. As I slowly panned around the room, I found something much worse. Absolutely nothing. There was a lit lantern set up on a table near the altar that was in the middle of being restored. Other than that, there were a lot of pews that were halfway constructed. The ones that were finished looked like they had been sanded and were waiting for a layer of stain. I walked down the center aisle as if looking for a seat at a wedding or a funeral. As I approached the partially reconstructed pulpit, I looked up and saw a life-size wooden carving of Jesus on the cross. It looked old, Not like wine that ages well, but like decrepit. It had been painted flesh colors at one time, but now it was cracked and peeling away from the carving. It looked grotesque to see layers of skin peeling away like it was rotting off his body. I'm not the most religious man, but I believe in Jesus. I've prayed enough prayers, sitting in foxholes and caves, asking to be rescued from bad situations, and I'm still here. I wouldn't call him and I best buds. I know our relationship could be closer, but seeing him that way, rotting to pieces, was just disturbing. As I looked into his face, I swore I saw his eyes open for an instant. I blinked my own eyes to be sure I was seeing right, but when I looked again, they were closed. It was my imagination playing tricks on me. At least that was what I told myself as I stepped onto the platform and looked around. Off to each side were doors. I went to the one to the right and found a small broom closet. The one on the left held a set of stairs that went down and disappeared into darkness. Just inside the door there was yellow and black caution tape blocking the way down. I shone the light on the stairs, and they looked sturdy enough. I reached for the tape, but before I got a hold of it, a strong hand grabbed my shoulder and turned me around. "What do you think you're doing here?" said a man who was a full foot shorter than me, but his grip felt like iron. "I was about to go down those stairs," I said. He looked at me with the incredulous look a parent gave a toddler who was reaching for a hot stove. "And you didn't see the caution tape?" he said. "I saw it." "Who are you anyway? I've never seen you before." "Jones," I said, offering my hand. "I'm with Sentinel Security. I was called in to investigate why workers keep quitting." He looked at my hand, then at me. "So this investigation includes ignoring obvious warnings." My hand was still extended, but had yet to be shaken. I let it fall to my side. "Are you a worker or a foreman?" He scoffed. "Nothing so formal. I make sure people do what needs to be done." "So, foreman." His eyes bled with suspicion as he stared at me. "Where did you say you were from again?" As I was about to answer, more workers entered, followed by the owner I'd met last night. "Let's ask the boss if he knows you," the foreman said smugly. The owner locked eyes with me and gave me the strangest look as he walked up to us. "Good morning," he said, addressing both of us. "Good morning, sir," the foreman said. "I caught this man snooping around in here." "Did you now?" he said. "Is that true?" "I wasn't snooping. I was investigating," I said. "Don't you remember our conversation from last night?" His eyes opened a hair wider for an instant, then went back to normal. "Of course I do," he said with a smile that seemed forced. "Remind me again. My memory isn't the best." "We met in the saloon, talked for a little bit, and then you showed me to my room." "Indeed," he said with a raised eyebrow. "Did I say anything else?" "You told me you bought this place after your wife passed away, and problems started after you found the first dead worker." "Dead?" the foreman said with alarm. "When did this happen?" The owner burst into laughter. "It appears Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones here has pulled a fast one on you," he said to the foreman. "Perhaps he and I should go and discuss the matter in private, and you can continue with your work." The owner grabbed my arm and guided me away from the foreman, whose eyes burned as they followed us out the door. We walked out of the church in silence as he nodded to workers who were straggling in to start work for the day. He led me back to the saloon where we sat at the same table as before. "So you and I met in this saloon last night," he said. "At this very table," I said. "I came to the door and you pulled a gun on me." His eyebrows raised. "Did I now? And what time was this?" "I'd say around 9. We sat here and talked about what was going on with the workers." "And what else did I say, other than about the worker?" "I asked you why you hadn't left, and you said it was too late." This time he didn't try to hide it. His eyes grew wide. He stared at me for a long moment, then seemed to gather himself. "I apologize, Mr. Jones, if this all seems a little strange," he said. "You and I did not have a conversation last night." It was my turn to raise my eyebrows. At 9 o'clock last night, I was in bed with my very much alive wife. "But you said, and we have not had any workers die." "I don't understand. Neither do I." I thought about it for a long moment. "You were drinking when you talked to me. Is it possible you were too drunk to remember?" He leaned a little closer. "I haven't had a drink in 19 years. He reached into his pocket and set a coin on the table. I picked it up and looked at it. It was an Alcohol Anonymous coin. "Then, who did I talk to last night?" He put the coin back in his pocket. "Are you sure it was me who was drinking?" I looked at him and read the suspicion in his eyes. "I don't drink." He leaned back in his chair. "It seems we've reached an impasse," he said. "Perhaps I should call your company and have a different person come and investigate the matter." I wanted to find out what was going on. "Perhaps you should give me at least a day to investigate," I said, "unless there's some other reason you don't want me to get to the bottom of this." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Please continue your investigation, Mr. Jones," he said, unimpeded. "I will inform the foreman to allow you free rein." "Thank you," I said, standing to leave. "Just one more thing," he said. "What was the last part of what my doppelganger told you?" "You said it was too late to leave because you had disturbed something." His eyes fell to the table as if deep in thought. I went back to the church and began talking to the workers one by one. Each of them was hesitant to talk around the foreman, but once they were out of earshot, told very similar stories. There had been strange things going on, especially at night. It was more than just tools being moved around. Strange symbols would appear carved into the wood they were using. The owner would tell them to cut the symbols out and use whatever they could of the wood. One of the workers had gone missing, but after a day or so, the owner said he had quit. The strange thing was, no one was able to contact him after that. The more I dug, the more I found. Some of the workers had become curious as to why they were restoring this town out in the middle of nowhere. It turned out it had been long suspected that satanic rituals were carried out in this very church. It was also suspected to be the site of the earliest witch burnings. But the two facts that stuck out in my mind were no one hung around after dark. That was when things were alleged to get strange, and no one was allowed down the steps I had found before the foreman stopped me. The workers had been told the steps were unsafe and could collapse under the weight of a person. It didn't take much convincing to keep them away from the creepy stairs. By afternoon, I knew exactly what my next move was. I went back to my room and checked around to see if anything was missing. Nothing seemed to be, so I set my watch and took a nap. The alarm went off at 9 o'clock. I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, then geared up for my expedition. When I got to the church, it was empty. I made a beeline for the left door and the creepy staircase. With flashlights attached to a headband and my waistband, I was good to go to keep my hands free for whatever I might need them for. I attached a safety rope like mountain climbers do and found a sturdy spot to anchor it into the wall. If the stairs gave out on me, at least I wouldn't fall. As advertised, every stair creaked like it was about to give out, but thankfully, none of them did. The trip down was an assault on the senses. The damp, musty smell of rotting wood and general decay was nearly overwhelming. I was surprised at the general lack of cobwebs. It told me this area wasn't quite as off-limits as some had let on. Surprisingly, the bottom didn't open up into a full basement. There were a few wooden shelves at the base of the stairs, but they were empty. Instead, it became a narrow passageway. The floor was made of dirt, and the walls were the same stone the foundation of the church was made from. It seemed whoever had built this tunnel built it at the same time as the church. The ceiling barely made it to 6 feet. I had to duck to keep from brushing my head against it. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but this was the key to discovering what was happening here. I had been walking for 10 minutes, senses alert, hand on my holstered sidearm. Suddenly, the air changed. The smell became more pungent and the air warmer. There was a feeling of closing in that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned a corner and the tunnel opened into a large room with a high ceiling. I panned around trying to get the scope of the room when my light fell on something big in the corner. It looked like a massive black boulder that was made of leather. Watching, transfixed, I noticed it was moving. Not much, but just a bit, rising and falling. I realized it was breathing. Fear gripped me. I no longer had any interest in finding out what was going on here. I just wanted to turn and slowly back away. The thing made a noise. It was either a snort or a cough, but in either case it seemed to be waking up. I doused my lights and stayed as still as possible while listening in the total darkness. Its breathing became louder and less steady. I heard a creaking that sounded like bones when someone stretched. It was getting up, and I was standing in the middle of the tunnel. If by some miracle it didn't already know I was here, as soon as it walked over here it would run right into me. My mind raced to come up with options as I heard footsteps coming closer. I backed up against the wall and started edging to the left, hoping I was in the main room and not still in the tunnel. The footsteps were so close when they suddenly stopped. The absence of sound was deafening. I tried to hold my breath as I listened for the beast's breathing. It was slow and sporadic, as if it was listening for me. Neither of us moved. We barely breathed, each waiting for the other to reveal their location. My hand drifted to the gun as I tried to pull it out of the holster, as quietly as possible. The air shifted. The beast had moved, but I didn't know where. I heard a strange squelching sound, and then... "What are you doing, Mr. Jones?" I tried to hold off as long as possible, but curiosity got the best of me. I turned on my headlamp to find the owner standing right in front of me, staring at me with a maddening smile. My eyes darted around, looking for the beast, but I knew I wouldn't find it. It was standing in front of me. "So, are you the real thing?" I said, hoping to keep the panic out of my voice. "Or are you some shapeshifter who pretends to be someone else because he has no identity of his own?" "I am whoever I want to be," he said. I heard the squelching again, only this time I had the displeasure of watching it happen. His entire body rippled and tore itself apart, only to reform into the beast for a moment, then tear apart again and reform into something much more terrifying. I gasped, looking into my very own eyes. "You see?" he said in my voice. "I can take your place and travel around pretending to solve problems." While he was changing, I glanced around to see if there was anything else in the room I could use. In the far corner, I saw what looked like a nest and an inverted cross hanging on the wall. "If you could, why haven't you?" I said, playing a hunch. "What? If you were free to go anywhere, then why haven't you? Why sit here in the middle of the woods with nothing to do?" "I choose to stay here," he said in my voice. "You choose because this is where your power is. You know so little. I'm rebuilding this place so my worshippers can live here and pray to me, giving me all the power I need. Just like when this place was first built. And until my followers thrive, I survive off of human sacrifices. So you did kill the worker. And no one remembers him, just like they won't remember you. He grinned and took a step toward me, but I drew my pistol and shot him in the forehead. He fell to the ground, bleeding. It was a strange sight to watch myself die, but then the squelching began again, and he reshaped into his demonic form. He stood 10 feet tall and covered in leathery skin that looked like tiny teeth. His face was a nightmare of glowing red eyes and massive, sharp fangs. He roared at me in what sounded like 1,000 voices. I turned and ran down the tunnel, ducking so I didn't hit my head and knock myself out. That would have ended my escape and my life. I heard the squelching again and heard my voice call after me. "You can't escape, and besides, I know how to find you." I turned and fired, hitting him, or me, in the chest. He dropped and squelched again. I wanted to watch him turn into his demon form, to see him squashed into the tunnel that was too small for him. But I didn't dare squander this time for anything but escape. It seemed like forever until I came to the stairs. I took them 2 at a time. Once I reached the top, I turned to see him at the bottom. I shot him again, then found a lantern inside the church, lit it, and tossed it down the stairs. The glass shattered, spreading fire all over the bottom stairs. They began to burn almost immediately. I could hear his desperate cries as the flames crawled up the stairs, destroying them one by one. Turning and running out the doors, I didn't bother with my things in my room. I hopped in my car and drove like a bat out of, well, you know. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I glanced in my rearview mirror, hoping I wouldn't see that thing chasing me. Instead, I saw a glow growing in the forest behind me. I prayed the whole church was on fire, and it would spread to all the houses. I only wished his followers were in the houses when they burned. I wondered how many more places there were like this in the world. Bite Me by David O'Hanlon. The rabbit exited the log he'd taken shelter in and kicked at the fleas that had done much the same inside his ear. The bunny stretched, then hopped onto the log. His nose twitched in the adorable way that rabbit noses do. The air was cool and smelled of the previous night's storm. The morning sun caught in the dewdrops, bedazzling the high grass of the meadow. His beady eyes surveyed the land. Parasites be damned, it was a beautiful morning in the Ozarks. Just across the field there was a downward slope that led to a narrow holler rife with tight caves. Berry bushes grew plentifully, and rainwater pooled in the various porous stones. For the small fur-bearers of the forest, it was like hanging out at the mall. The rabbit was only halfway across the field and could already smell the females. He was late to the party, but it was better to be late than belated. A persistent eagle had chased him for over an hour the day before, forcing him out of his normal foraging range. He finally managed to escape at the expense of a squirrel that had been distracted by an acorn. Even in the woods, shit happens. The storm rolled in before the rabbit could get back to the warren, necessitating a night in the log motel. The rabbit knew arriving late wasn't going to hurt his chances any. Aside from the fleas, he was the perfect specimen of rabbit masculinity. He was almost to the safety of the trees when a shadow cast over him from above. Before he could react, the flaming mass struck in front of him. The earth erupted and the rabbit disappeared, his body becoming indistinguishable from the explosion. His head bounced when it finally came back down and rolled to a stop next to the smoldering crater left by the falling object. His dead eyes stared at the scorched metal and the strange glow of the otherworldly power source that had taken it across the galaxy. And inside the rabbit's ears, the fleas enjoyed their meal next to a romantic, radioactive fire. Several months later, Lila's nails tore through the tent's nylon bottom as she climaxed yet again. Rocco was a terrible boyfriend and a miserable human being, but he was a great lay. With that in mind, she'd suggested they camp in the woods the night before the big reunion, in hopes they could fuck away any relationship tensions that might boil over during the weekend with their former high school clique. Rocco groaned and collapsed on top of her, signaling the end of round 3. Without taking any of his weight off, he reached from the nearby pack of camels and pulled one out with his teeth. "Got a spare?" she asked. "About 10 of them," he replied, tossing the pack into the corner of the tent. Rocco crawled over Lila and unzipped the entrance, freeing the accumulated body heat and pheromones of the last hour. He lit his smoke and discarded the lighter before shuffling out into the humid Arkansas evening. 20 yards away, antenna twitched to life and rose out of the protection of the fossae to take in the chemical stench of sex and CO2. The combination hit the creature's sensory organs, bringing it out of its torpor like a fresh cup of Folgers. Rocco, the last true gentleman, wiped his cock on the tent flap and then walked to the tree line to relieve himself. He took a long pull from the cigarette and thought about the others as his bladder let loose. Every year since high school, they'd gotten together at Hawk's family cabin to brag about their accomplishments, and every year, Rocco had nothing to add to the conversation. He hated those assholes. They wasted their lives being overachievers, and every reunion they tried to make him feel bad, like he was wasting so much potential. As if. He did everything he wanted to without the burden of success. Successful people set expectations that they have to live up to, whereas Rocco just had to live to exceed expectations. Piss spattered his feet, breaking him out of his self-congratulations. He looked down at his bare toes, and something shuffling through the fallen leaves toward him. Rocco redirected the stream in its direction. Whatever it was stopped, but didn't retreat. "Kinky little son of a bitch, aren't you?" he chuckled. The warm fluid rolled down the armored plates to the still stiff limbs of the creature. Its simple eyes zeroed in on the source of the heat. The glowing end of the cigarette could have been an ice cube compared to the bright glow of Rocco's shrinking erection. The creature sprang for cover. Lila scuttled out of the tent in a panic. Rocco's shrill screams drew nearer, and she spun on her hands and knees trying to find out where they were coming from. She finally spotted him. He stumbled wildly with a large, dark object obscuring his crotch like an overzealous censor. The thing fell between his legs, bloated with its first meal. Blood erupted from the swollen, torn flesh volcano that had once been Rocco's penis and showered the foot-long insect. It rolled onto all 6 feet and turned its gaze to the hot, terrified exhalations of Lila. She started to scream, but the creature was too fast. In a single bound, it covered the distance between them and impacted her face with the force of a baseball bat. Teeth flew into the darkness, and the giant flea turned its attention to the blood pooling in the young woman's mouth. The serrated stylets of its mouth plunged into the puddle and through the back of her skull. The next afternoon, "That fucking loser's probably in jail again," Hawk said as he navigated down the steep slope of the holler. "Rocco keeps getting older, but he's never going to grow up. Kara and I are about to open our second dealership. Rocco's still passing around his first demo." "The world needs musicians as much as it needs car salesmen," Danny replied. "His band's called Thundercock," Hawk snorted. "Let's not pretend he's Beethoven." "I meant we shouldn't downplay the value of art. Not that he was making any. Thundercock is dog shit, Brian chimed in. But I gotta admit, they're just as good as a lot of mainstream bands. Whitesnake, Danny said curiously. Yeah, they're on that list, Brian replied before noticing his wife had stopped to inspect something in the foliage. Wait, you mean you saw a snake? Brian shivered. The woods are just a part of life when you grow up in Arkansas, but that doesn't mean you have to like everything about them. Ever since an incident in the Scouts when he first came face to face with a copperhead nesting on the side of a tree trunk, Brian had a lurking fear that the scheming serpents constantly surrounded him. Next to that log, Danny told him, a solid white snake. That's no log, Hawk said, pushing past her for a better look. Would it kill y'all to slow down? Kara's thick twang called from the top of the embankment. Take your time, honey, Frank said dismissively. The opaque things slithered under the log when the humans got too close. Danny circled the object and put a hand on her stomach. Revulsion churned her still digesting breakfast like a Cuisinart. The desiccated skin had shrunk back, making the terrifying teeth look even more menacing. There was no blood anywhere. Stranger still, no bugs chewed on the dehydrated flesh. It's a bear, Hawk nearly whispered. Why does it look like that? Danny asked. Dehydration, Brian said as he approached. It's mummified. Revenge of the mummy bear. Wahahaha, Hawk teased. Come on, man. Mummified? That's why nothing's eating it, Brian informed him. He's bear jerky. Sucks to be him, Hawk shrugged. The lake is calling. The fuck? Something just touched my ankle. The leaves shuffled around them, and something long and white inched along beneath their cover. Then more somethings moved. Brian kicked at the detritus and saw the 6-inch larvae crawling hurriedly toward the shelter of the bear's corpse. Well, that's enough outside for me, he grumbled. Ditto, Danny whispered. What are y'all looking at down there? Kara called as she tried to ease down the decline, but only managed a semi-controlled slide instead. Gosh, did y'all see that? I almost fell right on my keister. Ain't this where we saw all them squirrels last year? The other three looked around at the still trees. The dingbat was right. It had been like a Disney scene when they last visited, with every variety of woodland critter having a block party despite the encroachment of the nuisance of humans. Even Rocco's boombox and his Metallica tape hadn't been enough to disturb them. But this time... Where are all the fucking animals? Brian asked. Danny knelt beside a strangely shaped stone and flipped it over, revealing the bucked teeth. Just like the bear, the jackrabbit had been completely dried out by something. Snap it to a Slim Jim, Hawk said, holding up the dehydrated remains of a raccoon by its tail. What the hell could have done this? Those, Danny finally managed to get out. She pointed unsteadily toward Kara. The dark sclerites that armored their bodies blended in with the rocks jutting from the hillside almost perfectly. One of the insects launched itself at Kara so quickly that it appeared to teleport from its moss-covered perch to the pale skin beneath the ragged hem of Kara's cutoffs. The impact sent her to the ground with a muted squeal. 2 more fleas pounced on her. The cracking of her rib cage sent the others running like a starter pistol. A flea jumped, covering 20 feet in the blink of an eye. It landed between Hawk's broad shoulders and pierced his back, scraping against the scapula with its mouthparts. The former football star tumbled forward and rolled back to his feet. The fall shook the bug loose, but the armored body had protected it from the weight of the human crashing down on top of it. Another flea landed on his chest. Hawk pulled it away before it could bite. He tried to squash it in between his hands, and when that didn't work, opted for headbutting it. The exoskeleton ruptured with a spray of hemolymph across Hawk's face. The flea's forelimbs grappled with the human's wrists. Its hooked feet latched into the muscles and ripped them free from the bone. Hawk dropped the bug and stumbled away. He stared helplessly at the mauled tissue and exposed arteries within. The two fleas leapt at the wounds. Their voracious appetites overpowered the giant human in seconds. Hawk's world spun. His knees wobbled and his vision blurred. He hit the ground hard, but it did not disturb the buffet. Long after everything went dark, he could still hear them slurping noisily at the last drops of his life. Danny didn't know where the hell she was running to, but knew that wherever it was would be better than where they'd been. They'd stumbled into the monster bug's nest. Once they were far enough away, they'd be safe. At least she hoped that was how it worked. She didn't know much about regular insects, let alone 12-inch demon fleas. "Left!" Brian gasped. He slowed to a jog. "Go left!" Danny was breathing too hard to speak. Her legs were on fire. She wanted to stop running, to gather her thoughts, to formulate a plan, but she was convinced every stone and mass of leaves she saw was another one of those damned things. She banked left, jumping over a fallen log, and veered towards something resembling a trail. It is a trail, she realized. 2 years before, they'd ridden Hawk's three-wheelers along the path to an abandoned summer camp on the north end of the lake. They weren't far from the cabin. More importantly, they weren't far from their Jeep. Danny's energy levels surged with her new hopefulness. She ignored the pain and pushed onward, faster than before. After several minutes, the path grew steeper. Her legs couldn't hold up any longer, and she fell forward, but didn't allow it to stop her. She dug her fingers into the earth, crawling along until she could run again, then falling and repeating the process, all the way to safety. She didn't stop until she'd clambered up the steps and onto the front porch. Spots filled Danny's vision as she lay there, choking on the breaths she tried desperately to inhale. It took several minutes until she gained some control over herself and finally sat up. She was alone. Fear flooded her with another burst of adrenaline. "Brian! Brian!" Danny looked around frantically. "Brian, answer me!" He didn't. The woods were as still and dead as that bear had been, as her friends were, as Brian probably was too. Danny climbed to her feet, taking only a few seconds to scan the path for him once more. No one was coming. She threw open the cabin door and ran to their room for the car keys. "He'll be there when you get outside," she told herself. "He's never been a strong runner. He'll catch up by the time you find the keys. He's probably waiting at the Jeep already." She grabbed the rabbit's foot keychain from the nightstand and rolled the soft ornament in her palm. Her dad gave it to her the first day of college. For good luck. "Good luck," she laughed softly. "You had 4 of them, and look what happened to you." Glass broke in the kitchen. Danny stuffed the keys into her shorts and crept stealthily into the hallway. A pan clattered to the floor. She looked around for a weapon, though she wasn't sure exactly what she could use to fight a giant flea. She eased along the wall to the kitchen door. A cabinet banged open. More things crashed. Another cabinet slammed. She took a deep breath and momentarily forgot how to exhale. The bugs didn't have a reason to trash the place, which meant someone or something else was inside. She finally managed to let go of the captive breath and rounded the jam. The scream was unintentional. Kara leaned on the counter, wheezing. Sweat plastered her hair to her face. Bug bites the size of hubcaps oozed from their gaping centers. Kara scratched violently at them, crisscrossing the deep furrows she'd left with earlier attempts. Vomit stained her gory shirt. Her eyes were milky, pus-filled orbs tinged with pink swirls from the internal hemorrhaging. Convulsions racked her body, bringing her to her knees. Danny started toward her, kicking something across the floor. She followed the noise as it rolled. It bumped against the leg of the dining room table. Danny smiled at the yellow can of 612, the insect repellent that had been banned the year before, but Kara insisted it was the only thing that worked against the beefy mosquitoes of Bull Shoals. Apparently it worked on mutant fleas as well. That must have been what Kara was searching for in the... Ah! Kara moaned and clawed at the bite on her chest. She coughed, hacking up crimson phlegm. Stop! Make it stop! Kara banged the inside of her head against the counter. Stop it! She hissed. The banging grew harder, faster. The trim cracked. Spatter decorated the cabinet doors. Kara continued shrieking and moaning like one of the undead. Danny dived for the can of repellent. Kara's screams were punctuated by the frantic strikes of her head against the counter. Then she collapsed. Gray matter pushed through the shards of broken skull to mingle with the other fluids in Kara's matted hair. Danny stretched her sweat-drenched t-shirt over her nose. Fleas carried plagues. She didn't want to believe that's what the bugs were, but there was no denying it. The way they jumped, the way they ate. Giant fleas had attacked them, and if the insects had mutated, then maybe the viruses they carried had as well. She backed out of the kitchen, rubbing the repellent across her exposed areas. She blasted through the front door, then slid to a sudden halt. Everything was quiet, save for the ticking of the tin roof, expanding in the afternoon sun. A childhood memory scratched at the back of her mind, as persistent as any flea bite. She thought about the stray that had wandered into their yard when she was 5. The pup rolled over onto his back for belly rubs, and little Danny had been scarred for life. The fleas were clustered together, turning the dog into their own personal bonanza buffet. She hadn't understood what the little dark specks all over the animal were. Some crawled freely between his stiff, tawny hairs. She probed at a suckling swarm of the parasites. Detecting new prey, they leapt onto Danny's hands. They'd bitten her dozens of times before she managed to get them all off. She had nightmares for months, which had only been quelled once her father explained to her that fleas couldn't survive without an animal to live on. That's why everything was silent, she realized. The sparse populations of black bears and elk were the largest animals in the Ozarks. It wouldn't have taken the monsters long to exhaust those options. There were no viable hosts, so they'd turned to attacking everything they could for even a few drops of warm blood. Danny started off the porch, and the first step squeaked under her weight. It reminded her of a dying animal in the silence surrounding the cabin. She paused. One of the rocks in the yard seemed to move. She blinked the sweat away from her eyes as best she could and watched it for a moment. It was just a rock. She took another step and the stairs gave a relieved groan. She wondered if fleas even had ears. The popping of the roof grew more rapid. She glanced over her shoulder and started running. The encroaching humans had been enough to awaken the entire scratch of super fleas. After months of dormancy, they were desperate for a meal. Any meal. The hot roof made the cabin look like a giant animal to their simplified, heat-sensing eyes. They'd forgotten entirely about the humans that had led them there, and attached themselves to the first hope they'd had for a suitable host. Their piercing stylets punched fruitlessly into the unnatural skin of the house. Starvation was taking its toll on them. One of the weakest slid off the roof and into the yard, its legs curled up to its abdomen as it died without a sound. The others continued working away at the cabin's metal flesh. Danny was almost to the Jeep when the windshield of Hawk's Toyota shattered. The malnourished flea had misjudged its jump and smashed face first into the safety glass. Its lanky hind legs kicked for another go. The sickle-like claws scraped divots into the truck's hood. Another famished flea launched itself from the roof, landing a foot from Danny. She squeezed the bottle of 612, blasting the bugs in the face. It hopped in a circle, toppling wildly over itself, and then bounded into the woods. The incessant pecking of the parasites on the roof stopped in near unison. One after another, they sprang from their perch. Danny stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. She scrambled on all fours, finally getting to her feet, just in time to grab the Jeep's door handle. She threw open the red door, inadvertently batting down an attacking creature. Another landed on her arm. She grabbed its head, mashed her thumb into the thing's eye, and slung it away so quickly that its clawed feet tore through her skin. Danny screamed and fell backwards into the vehicle. The insects swarmed around her. She pulled the door shut, catching one in the jamb. Its armored exoskeleton cracked, but it didn't break. The monster tried to bite. It squirmed and swung its head around. The lancing mouthparts stabbed into the seat repeatedly. Danny leaned back, pulling the door with all her weight. It never made a sound, and somehow that terrified her more than anything else. It should have roared or hissed or made some other horrifying noise like the monster it was. But the thing was completely silent as the two combatants tried to murder one another. Danny reached for the keys and found the pocket empty. The flea inched inside. She quickly pulled the door with both hands again. The windshield cracked in tiny snowflakes. The fleas were striking at her heat signature, fracturing the barrier between themselves and their feast. She was dead, and she knew it. Either her arms were going to tire out, or the windshield was going to shatter. But sooner, rather than later, the fleas would be inside the Jeep with her. Her muscles burned. Danny wondered which would be more painful, a single flea, or the entire scratch latching on at once. She'd probably lose enough blood to pass out in a second or two, if all of them got to her. The canvas roof sagged suddenly. Hooks tore through the top as others searched for another way in. She tried to weigh her options only to find herself without any. The lacerations on her arms leaked down the door panel. The handle started slipping through her grasp. Danny swung the appendage over the entrapped flea and flexed the muscles to speed up the flow. Droplets pelted the monster like crimson rain. It twitched and twisted, trying to find the source of the smell. Driven mad by hunger, it stabbed into its own thorax, chasing a drop of the precious fluid. Danny released enough pressure to kick it to the ground while it was distracted. Before she could slam the door, she saw other fleas descend on it. They ferociously bit into their brethren, trying to get their share of the blood. Danny hit the door locks out of instinct. She crawled into the back of the vehicle to find a weapon. A nylon bag caught her eye while she wrestled the tire iron free. She looked out the plastic back window. Behind the extra gas can, the driveway was a steep hill that banked hard to the right. The fabric tore overhead as more fleas congregated. She could see them through the widening gashes and knew she was almost out of time. They were going to get in through sheer dumb luck when the weight brought the canvas top down. A plan was starting to formulate, but she needed just a little longer to put it into motion. She clambered back to the front and rolled the passenger window down an inch. pressing her wounded arm against the opening. She mashed at the cuts. Blood trickled down the glass in tiny rivulets, but it was more than enough to draw the attention of the ravenous fleas. She cranked the window almost closed, but left enough gap to give them false hope as she smeared the fluid over the upholstery. The parasites fought for space, knocking each other aside and clawing away the more persistent ones for their chance to get into the Jeep. Danny toppled into the back once more. She grabbed the bag and wrestled out an emergency flare. A flea dropped through the roof and scurried onto the back seat. Danny brought the tire iron up, running it through. She swung the spiked end, bug and all, toward the back window and slashed the plastic. She discarded the weapon, watching the flea suckling desperately at its own bodily fluids, oozing down the metal. Danny struck the flare and wedged it into the gas can's handle. She flipped over the back seat and released the parking brake as she moved to the driver's seat. She rubbed her arm across the dashboard. The roof collapsed, and Danny opened the door, letting herself drop backwards out of the rolling vehicle. Fleas sprang onto the fresh blood trail she'd left for them. The Jeep gained speed as it descended the driveway. The starving fleas were too busy stabbing at the instruments and radio in hopes of finding more blood within to notice their predicament. The Jeep missed the turn and jumped a stump, careening into the woods before slamming into a tree. The impact ruptured the gas can. The flare ignited the wave of fuel as it washed over the vehicle. The fleas became fireballs, shooting out of the wreckage. Others were trapped inside the mangled Jeep. Their internal fluids boiled until they exploded from the pressure inside their armored bodies. Danny laughed at the sound of the parasitic popcorn bursting. She'd survived. She'd won. The Jeep's gas tank exploded, rumbling the ground beneath her. She watched the pillar of fire and smoke rise above the treetops. Danny laid back. She'd find the keys to Hawk's truck later. Maybe Rocco and Lila would finally show up, and she wouldn't have to. Or maybe the fire would attract a game warden. That part could wait. 5 minutes before, she was sure she was going to die. She was safe, and she just wanted to spend some time relishing in that. She closed her eyes. Her heart rate was starting to slow down when she heard branches in the trees above. She opened her eyes slowly, looking for the source. A fat squirrel eased out onto a branch, looking down curiously at the human. Danny smiled at the critter and brought her wounded arm up and waved at it. It chittered in response. "Hey there," she said, fighting back the urge to cry. "We made it, little fella." It chittered again. A shadow fell across its furry form. Danny barely processed it before the flea dropped onto the rodent. The stylets punctured the squirrel's neck, effectively decapitating it. The flea drank greedily from the stump, and Danny watched in horror as the plump body shriveled. The slurping let her know the parasite had finished the appetizer. The flea jumped from the branch straight for Danny's prone body. Something boomed, and bits of exoskeleton pelted Danny's body. She rolled over and saw Brian limping toward her with one of Hawk's skeet guns over his shoulder. "Kills on contact," he said. "Oh my God!" Tears welled up in her eyes. "You're alive!" Danny ran to him, throwing her arms around his plump waist and burying her face into his chest. He kissed the top of her head and forced himself to let out a manly chuckle that was harder to believe than giant mutated flies. Danny squeezed him harder, and they both sank to the ground. "I thought they got you," Danny sniffled. "Almost," he whispered. "They wouldn't follow Kara because of all the bug spray she had on, so I followed her back. It was like they couldn't find me in her trail. Then I saw them gathering on the roof, So I hid. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. I don't care. I'm just glad you made it. Danny squeezed his chubby face between her hands. That we made it. Yeah, me too. Brian stood and helped her up. I appreciate the romantic fire, honey, but I wish you'd blown up someone else's car. The ground trembled beneath them again. But there hadn't been another explosion. Danny looked around at the rocks dotting the yard, wondering which of them might be hidden bugs. Her eyes flicked to the trees. Nothing was moving. Her hand moved from Brian's side to the double-barreled shotgun. She snatched it from his hand, passing it behind her back to her dominant hand like a majorette. The ground began to pulse and crack. Hey, babe, she said quietly. I think it's time we flee. I Hate Working at the Gas Station After Discovering Its Dark Secret by Michael Kelso. Every morning it's the same thing. People lining up at the pumps that seem to always be full. I've seen fights erupt when someone cuts line at the pump. And dear God, don't get in the way of them ordering their gallon-sized bucket of coffee to go with their pseudo-egg wrapped in dough and deep fried. Part of this nutritious breakfast. Every morning it looks like an army of ants on crack running around grabbing whatever food-type substance and drinks they can, then taking their usual position of impatiently waiting in line. I love the different poses. The watch watcher. They must glance at their watch every 2 seconds to show how much they're being inconvenienced. These are usually the ones getting into a Mercedes or BMW when they leave. I don't know why they don't get their breakfast catered. I'm sure they can afford it. The foot tapper. Usually they have something stuck in their ear and can't hear their order being called. The heavy sigher. Exhales loudly every third time the watch watcher checks the time, and when the foot tapper has to be told to move up in line. As if anyone could hear him over the music that's blaring so loud over the speakers, making it so easy for everyone. Did I mention I work here? Sometimes I wonder why after the things I've seen. Not just the idiots, but other things. Much darker things, but we'll get to that. Every morning I have to deal with these idiots. Is it still called road rage if you feel it in a gas station? As much as I hate them, customers are actually the easiest part of my job. I mean, who wouldn't want to get out in the middle of the night when the temperature is below zero and the wind is howling to change the bags and the trash cans because it's the appointed time? And who appointed the time, you ask? Why, the manual, of course. The corporate bean counters have done studies and run focus groups or some nonsense to decide the perfect time of day, or, in this case, night, to empty the trash. It's all in the manual. The manual is your friend. The manual is your God. The manual must be obeyed at all costs. That's what the manual says. So if it's cleaning the toilets, emptying the trash, washing out the coffee makers, the manual tells us exactly when and how to do it. That's a load off my mind. I don't even have to worry about not knowing how to clean a toilet. The manual tells me. What it doesn't tell me is what happens when the power goes out only at our station every night. At exactly 2:59 a.m. and comes back on at 3:01. I've seen this so many times. I watch the McDonald's beside us and their lights never go out. What's even stranger is the security cameras never seem to pick it up. I've reviewed the recordings. No loss of power ever shows. What does happen is somehow the timestamp on the video suddenly shoots from 2:59 to 3:01 like those 2 minutes never existed. The corporate techies call it a glitch and tell me to ignore it. The rest of us don't mention it. Not if we know what's good for us. But I know why it happens. I don't tell anyone. For fear of being sent to. Is it corporate who keeps us shaking in terror at that potential of letting outsiders know what happens during those 2 missing minutes every night? Yes and no. It's something much closer. Much darker. Something that could... I guess the best way to describe it would be to tell the story of Kenny. I know when I first heard his name, I did the famous line from South Park, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny!" It used to make me chuckle. I don't do that anymore. He started working here around 5 months ago. Wow, has it really been that long? Anyway, he was just another goofy teenager starting his first job after high school. Not that I was an elder scholar or anything, I only started here a year before Kenny did. He was fun to work with and we instantly became buddies. We loved to goof off during the night shift. Most nights it was just us working together. The place was usually dead from midnight until 5. We would rush around to get all our chores done so we had some free time. More than once we got into chicken nugget battles, which would have us cleaning up right before the morning rush help came on. We found out exactly where the cameras could and couldn't see and hid from them while we held our battles. We became so good at it that the night security guys would call to ask where we were. Yes, the corporate bean counters monitored us, day and night. Big Brother was always watching. More than once we discussed the option of tearing down the cameras and visiting corporate headquarters to shove them, well, in some very interesting and anatomically uncomfortable areas of management's collective persons. But as for what happened to Kenny, we were having one of our nugget battles when Kenny gave a shout. I went over to see what was wrong and found him holding his cheek. He said something sharp hit him. I told him I was just throwing nuggets when he looked down and found the offending object. He picked up a nugget that was broken in half, but there was something sticking out of it. There was what looked like a woman's diamond engagement ring. We debated back and forth how it could have gotten lodged in there when Kenny pulled it out and found the meat perfectly formed around it. "I don't think it got stuck in there," Kenny said. "I think it was processed this way." "That would mean," I said, "that someone was accidentally processed in the meat machine." "Are we sure it was an accident?" Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew how ludicrous they sounded. That kind of thing only happened in the movies. Didn't it? Kenny's eyes locked on mine, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. I looked up and saw we were in the camera's view. "Stick that thing in your pocket, quick," I said. Kenny obeyed, and we went about cleaning up as usual, but I could tell it was bothering him. "Forget about that thing, man," I told him. "It was just some weird coincidence." "How many chicken nuggets have you eaten from this place?" he said with a haunted look in his eye. I thought for a moment, knowing the answer was much higher than I wanted it to be. In fact, thinking about the ring and the potential source for the meat in the nuggets made me feel ill. "Doesn't matter, I won't be eating any more." "What about that poor woman? And her family?" "What about her?" I said, my eyes nervously darting towards the nearest camera. "Doesn't she deserve more than that?" "What do you want me to do? Hunt down her family and tell them where we found the ring?" Kenny's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." "Count me out of that, man," I said, hoping it would be enough to give him second thoughts about it. He shrugged and went about his cleaning duties. But from that moment on, he changed. Every time he was on break, he would be looking things up on his phone. More than once I glanced over and he was looking at missing person sites and making notes on ones that were in the area. The longer he investigated this, the less he was interested in anything else. I swear it was like he was slowly turning into a zombie. All he did was stare at his phone and make notes. One day I came in the break room and he was just sitting there, motionless. His eyes were open but focused on some point off in the distance. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. You okay, Kenny? I said. He slowly turned toward me, like some possessed doll. I'm fine. Okay, I said. I know who she is. Who is? The woman whose ring we found. Okay, who is she? She worked at the distribution center. You mean the company's distribution center where we get all our products? He nodded slowly. How did you find that out? I asked a lot of questions. Asked who? He stared at me with an intensity in his eyes I'd never seen before. People. What people? He turned slowly and looked up at one of the cameras. It's not important, he said, looking away from the camera and resuming his unfocused stare. You okay, man? Yeah, I'm fine, he said in a monotone voice. It's just... I waited for a long moment for him to finish his sentence, but he just sat there, like someone had hit his pause button. Just what? I said. He jumped like I had startled him awake. What? What do you mean, what? I said. You were talking and just stopped. I did? Yeah. What was I saying? That's what I was trying to find out. What? Yep. Yep? No, what? What? I shook my head in frustration. Never mind, I said, walking away, leaving him sitting there, staring into space. I couldn't figure out if he was messing with me or if something had happened. Had he really been tracking down where the ring came from? Had he really run across some people who had scared him so bad they turned him into this zombie? I decided it was time for some answers. After our shift was over, I followed him home. Only he didn't go home. He drove to the distribution center and parked on a secluded spot outside the fence where his car wouldn't be seen. I waited for him to get out of sight before I parked my car and followed him. He stalked through the woods outside the fence for a while until he came to a section that came apart when he pulled it. He slipped inside and I followed suit after he was out of sight. I came around the corner of the massive building and found him sitting at a picnic bench, smoking a cigarette. I stayed back and watched, shocked that I'd never seen him smoke before. I wondered why he would break in here just to smoke a cigarette. The answer came quickly. The door of the warehouse opened and 3 people stepped out. I held my breath thinking he'd been caught. But he was calm and continued to sit at the bench. In fact, the people who had come out began talking to him. He even offered one of them a cigarette. It was then I realized they were in the same outfit he was wearing. The company didn't have different uniforms for those who worked at the stations and those who worked in the distribution center. They chatted for a few minutes, then they all got up and went back inside, Kenny included. It was brilliant. He slipped right inside, no fuss, no muss. I figured, what the hell, it worked for Kenny, as I walked up and sat at the same picnic table. I didn't know how long it would be until the next break, so I tried a different approach. I knocked on the door. For a few minutes, no one answered. Each time I knocked, I became more anxious that a security guard would show up and arrest me for trespassing. Finally, after knocking, the door opened. I stepped back when I saw a security guard standing there. I hesitated. Well, the large man said in a deep voice. Well, what? Was all I could think to answer back. Well, are you going to come in or not? It took my brain a moment to comprehend what he'd said. Sorry, yeah, I said, diving through the door. He shut it behind me with a loud bang. It sounded like my doom. I knew he was on to me. He was just getting me inside so he could contain me and I couldn't get away. I stood there, vapor-locked, unable to move for fear of what the guard would do. He stared at me, his eyes boring into mine as though sucking every secret out of me. What do you think you're doing? He said. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, he said, folding his arms in front of his massive chest. No, I promise I don't know anything, I said, hoping my knees wouldn't start knocking. All right, enough of this, he said. I started to shake. I'd never been to prison. In fact, I'd never gotten in serious trouble in my life. And now, here I was, breaking and entering, even though I didn't really break. I just knocked and entered. I wondered if the judge would take that into account. You've had your break, now get back to work, he said. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Excuse me? You heard me. The company doesn't pay you to stand around. Get back to work. Yes, sir, I said, feeling the weight of a prison sentence lift from my shoulders. I took a step, then stopped. Which way is it to where they process the chicken nuggets? The guard rolled his eyes. Frickin' newbies, he muttered. Follow the red line. He pointed at the floor where several different colored lines ran down the middle of the hallway and disappeared into the distance. Thanks, I said, quickly following the red line away from him. It led down a long hallway and right up to a large set of double doors that read, Processing. I looked left and right, but there was no sign of Kenny. I stepped in through the double doors to a huge room full of conveyor belts. I looked around, but it was impossible to tell anyone apart when they were wearing hairnets and face masks. I hadn't made it 2 steps until I heard, "What do you think you're doing?" A woman dressed in a white lab coat accosted me. "You know you're not supposed to be on the floor without your hairnet and mask on." She shoved a hairnet on my head, then hooked a mask around my ears. "Now, where's your station?" I said, my eyes darting around as she watched me impatiently. "How long have you worked here?" she said, seeing my indecision. "First day," I lied. She sighed heavily. "You're not even supposed to be on the floor yet. You have videos to watch." I shrugged. "Wait here," she said. "I'll go find someone to take you upstairs and start your videos." I waited long enough for her to leave the room. Then I roamed around trying to find Kenny. I walked past line after line of people sorting through the chunks of meat, tossing aside parts that weren't usable, or at least weren't usable for the main product. The bad parts were tossed into plastic bins. As I walked by, I saw some interesting things in those bins. There were little pieces of shiny objects, dark blobs I couldn't identify, rocks, loose change, and I swear I saw a finger. As I passed, the people on the line took a second away from their work to shoot me nasty glances. I guess having someone stare over their shoulder who wasn't a supervisor was taboo. As I walked by, someone grabbed me and pulled me over to the line beside them. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kenny hissed. "Looking for you," I said. "Okay, you found me. Now get out of here," he said, going back to sorting. "Not until you tell me what's going on," I said, standing beside him and sorting pieces of meat. "If I promise to tell you everything later, will you leave?" I hesitated. My curiosity had been piqued. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, tossing a piece of rotten-looking meat into a bin. He sighed. "Later. We can't talk about it now." I grimaced, knowing that he wouldn't let me in on the secret. I glared at him when suddenly I saw the supervisor come back and look for me. "Promise me we'll talk about this tonight at work," he said. "I promise." I turned around and walked away from him. She saw me and made a beeline right for me. "What were you doing on the line when you haven't been properly trained?" "Deciding." "Deciding what?" "That this job isn't for me," I said, handing her my hairnet and mask. "I quit." She stared at me, jaw hanging open as I stormed off. I glanced back to see her narrowing her eyes in Kenny's direction. I made my way back out of the hallway and followed the red line back to where I had come into the building. I reached the exit door when I heard a familiar deep voice. "Decided it's not for you, eh?" I turned to see the security guard who had met me on the way in. "That job's not for anyone," I said. "Yeah, it's no tiptoe through the tulips." "What?" "It's an old saying, never mind. Why are you going out this way?" I suddenly remembered I was on the wrong side of the building. I figured I'd walk around to get some fresh air. He narrowed his eyes at me. I went for broke and bolted for the door. I could hear him running behind me. "Stop!" he yelled, much closer than I liked. I didn't obey. Instead, I hit the crash bar so hard I nearly knocked myself backward. The door flung open and smashed against the outside wall. I hit the open air and was around the corner before I knew it. I flew through the brush up to the fence and panicked when I couldn't find the open section right away. He was still in pursuit, but further behind. He must have lost sight of me for a minute. I ran along the fence, pushing on it as I went and growing more desperate with every moment. If I was stuck inside the fence, it would lead me right to the main entrance and I'd be caught. I was sweating from running, but also from the thought of going to jail, when a section of the fence gave way when I pushed it. I breathed a quick sigh of relief as I dove through the open fence to freedom. I ran to my car, not even thinking about the brush that had torn at my uniform and skin. I dove into the car and took off home. Only once I was moving did I look back and see Kenny's car sitting there, partially hidden. I wondered why he was being so secretive. I wondered if I had compromised him by leading them so close to his car. As I drove, my breathing returned to normal, followed by an adrenaline crash. I barely made it home and fell into bed. When I woke, it was dark. I jumped up in a panic, not sure where I was, until I banged my foot off my nightstand and screamed in pain. Once I could breathe again, I leaned over and turned on the light. It bathed the room in an eerie glow that made me think someone was here. I looked at the clock and realized I was late for work. I didn't have time to change, shower, or anything. I just ran out the door and hopped in my car. The drive to work was a blur. I hoped I wouldn't get pulled over. When I got there a half an hour late, I got an earful from my supervisor about not calling in to tell him. I apologized and went about my nightly routine. "This isn't the military," he said as he headed out. "But if you show up looking like that again, I'll have to write you up." I wasn't sure what he meant until I went to the bathroom and saw myself. My uniform looked like it had been run through a shredder. There were tears all over the shirt and pants. My narrow escape through the brush had not been kind. I cringed at the thought of dealing with customers looking like I had spent the night fighting off wild badgers. In the end, there was nothing I could do. I'd have to get a new uniform to replace this one and use one of my backups. I came out of the bathroom and nearly ran over Kenny. "You ready to spill your guts yet?" "What are you talking about?" he said with a blank stare. "That's not funny," I said. "You promised you'd talk to me tonight." "I am talking to you." "You're a real comedian. Now spill it." "Spill what?" "I'm not laughing, Kenny. Talk to me." He looked at me, and his eyes glazed over. It scared me. "Are you okay, man?" I said. "I'm fine." "Okay, what do you remember about this morning?" His eyes went a deeper glaze as he fell into a 1,000-yard stare. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and then it was like he woke up from a nap and looked at me. I went home and went to bed. I took a step back from him. "No, man, no, you didn't." "I didn't? You went to the distribution center." "Why would I do that?" I tried my best to find any sign he was joking, but I couldn't, and I knew him well enough to tell when he was serious. He was dead serious and believed every word he was saying. "You told me you'd found something out," I said. "What?" "I don't know. You said you would tell me tonight." His eyes lit up with curiosity. "Did I tell you?" "No," I said slowly. "I was waiting for you to tell me." "I wonder what it was," he said, his eyes becoming unfocused. "Okay, man, you're scaring me." Just then there came a beep, telling me someone had ordered food. "I gotta get that," I said, staring at him as he stood there like a robot trying to figure out an equation. I ran to the kitchen and started preparing the order. When it was nearly done, I saw Kenny come to the register and ring up the customer. "Number 38, I called out, setting the bag of food on the counter. I glanced up and froze when I saw who came for the bag. It was the security guard from the distribution center. "So, this is where you really work," he said, grabbing the bag. He shot me a sinister smile as he walked out. My fear melted, replaced with anger. I ran out the door after him. "Hey!" I yelled as he reached for his car door. "Yeah?" I approached slowly. "What did you do to my friend?" "Who?" "The cashier," I said, pointing inside to Kenny standing there behind the counter, looking like a statue. Then got a scared look in his eye. "I have to go," he said, ripping his door open and diving inside. "What did you do to him?" I said, grabbing his car door and holding it open. "Get away from me," he said. "Tell me first." His eyes darted around. "I can't talk to you," he said, barely opening his lips and staring straight ahead. "Why not?" His eyes darted up to one of the many security cameras, then back to staring straight ahead. He ripped the door out of my hand, closed it, and roared out of the parking lot. I watched him go, more confused now than ever. I slowly looked around and for the first time realized just how many cameras were aimed at the parking lot. I went back inside and did my job for the rest of the night, trying not to let my eyes drift up to any of the cameras. I kept my eye on Kenny, too, watching for any stray glances out of character, anything that would tell me he was joking. I didn't see one all night. The longer he went, the more scared I became. When our shift was over, I offered him a ride home, but he said he would be fine and drove off looking like a robot zombie. I wondered if he would make it. I tried to sleep that day, but I couldn't get my mind to shut down. It hadn't been 2 weeks since Kenny had found that ring and started his quest for the truth. I got out of bed having slept maybe an hour and dragged myself to the bathroom when there was a knock at my door. I answered it, and there stood the security guard. "What are you doing here?" I said through bleary eyes. "Can I come in?" "I don't know. Are you going to arrest me for trespassing?" "Should I?" I started to close the door. "No, I'm going to tell you what happened to your friend." I stopped and reopened the door. He stepped inside, giving the place a quick once-over. "Okay, so what happened?" He asked too many questions. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I've worked at that place for a while now, and one of the things I've learned is you don't ask questions." "I don't get it." "He showed up about a week or so ago. He just blended in and started working the line. Next thing I know, I'm hearing workers talk about someone causing trouble. I narrowed it down to your friend and tried to talk some sense into him, but he wasn't having it. That day that you pulled your escape act, they pulled him in and they had a discussion with him. And that's what made him go all zombie on me?" "You don't get it," the guard said. "They drugged him." "What?" "They have this drug they use that slowly eats away your brain until there's nothing left." "Wait, they're killing him?" "That's the way it works." "But why?" He looked around the room as if searching for something specific. "Do you have an Alexa or any other stuff like that?" "No, just my phone." "Give it to me." I hesitantly handed him my phone and he proceeded to remove the battery. "If they find out I'm telling you this, I'll be next." "Telling me what?" "The chickens." "What about them?" "They aren't chickens." "What the hell are you talking about?" "They have a system. They drive unmarked white vans out into the streets, round up homeless people, and take them to the distribution center. Once they have them there, they give them a much more powerful dose of the drug your friend is on. It kills their brain within hours. Then they process what's left." I stared at him for a long time. "So you're saying the chicken nuggets aren't chicken?" I ran to the bathroom and vomited into the toilet. When I came back out, he hadn't moved. "That can't be real," I said. "That's horror movie stuff." "You might be surprised how much stuff you see in movies is secretly real." "So you're saying my friend was poisoned?" He nodded. "Because he asked too many questions." He nodded again. "Then why is he still alive?" "I don't know. Maybe as a warning to you. Me? You were there too. That's how they work. They can get to you anywhere. They can slip it into your food or drink. They can mail you a letter with the drug on it. They can slip it on your car door's handle. It isn't just street people they grab. Protesters, whistleblowers, anyone who threatens their business. Do you know how many people disappear in this city every day? No. Let's just say they process a lot of chicken. What about all those workers? Wouldn't they know it wasn't chicken? They give them a lower dose, just enough to keep them from asking questions. I looked around the room. Okay, where's the hidden camera? His eyes darted around. What camera? The one for the reality show or whatever you and Kenny are in to prank me. You don't believe me? I don't believe you. He hung his head. I stuck my neck out to come warn you. Well, I appreciate the warning, I said sarcastically. He turned and walked to the door. Just keep an eye on your friend, he said, opening it. And watch out for white vans. He closed the door behind him. It was nearly time to go to work. I shook off the thought that was clinging to the back of my brain. What if he was right? I showered and dressed and made it to work on time. The shift was uneventful, except for my continual attempts to snap Kenny out of it. He didn't respond. It was just before 3 a.m. when I saw a white van pull up. No one got out of it, and I couldn't see inside because it had tinted glass. I shrugged it off and went back to my job, mopping the kitchen floor. The guard's words came to me as I was doing my chores. I looked back out at the white van, but it was gone. I shrugged and went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, I came out of the back room because someone was yelling. "Isn't anyone working around here?" An angry man raged at the counter. "I'm sorry," I said. "The cashier must be in the bathroom." I took care of him, then went on a mission to find Kenny. In his condition, he could have wandered off somewhere or gotten stuck in a closet. 20 minutes later, I was frantic. I hadn't seen hide nor hair of Kenny. I was even tempted to check on the roof, but the access ladder was still locked. It was starting to get busy and I didn't have time to search for him anymore. Between cooking and running register, I was falling behind by the second. I had a lot of irate customers by the time day shift came in and bailed me out. I was so far behind I stayed for an extra hour just to help them catch up. After my shift, I went to the supervisor. "I'm worried about Kenny," I said. "It's not like him to just disappear like that." "Maybe he got sick and went home without telling you." "Maybe, but then why is his car still here?" He looked at the security monitors and sure enough, Kenny's car was still sitting in the employee's parking lot. "That is weird. Tell you what, if he calls in, I'll give you a call." "Fair enough," I said, yawning. I drove home and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke, I felt more refreshed than I had in days. I went into work that night expecting to find Kenny there laughing at me for falling for such an awesome prank. He wasn't there. Instead, I had someone from day shift who had volunteered to work overtime. For 3 days, Kenny didn't show up. On the 4th day, I got a surprise. In the morning, I was making food orders when I called an order number, and the guard walked up to take his food. "Hey, have you seen Kenny at all?" I said. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he said. "Ha ha, very funny, seriously." I leaned closer. "Do you think they did something to him?" "Who did what to who?" I looked into his eyes and let go of his bag of food. He had the same vacant stare Kenny did, just before he disappeared. "You have a good day now," he said with a smile before walking out. I suddenly felt surrounded and alone at the same time. I glanced up at one of the cameras as its mechanical eye stared back at me. I stopped questioning what happened to Kenny. Deep down, though, I knew. They towed his car out of the lot. I don't know where it went to. Maybe there's a corporate car crusher for the vehicles of their victims. The worst part is they continue to get away with it. I wish there was some way I could prove what I know. But I can't. Without going into the distribution center and getting evidence, I've got nothing. I keep coming to work for some reason. I've started looking for another job. I've written this all down in hopes that someday someone might be able to use it. That they would read this and look in the right place to discover this horrible truth. I've been feeling more and more tired lately. Maybe it's just knowing about this horrible thing that's happened and having no way to stop it. I wanted to write more of what I remembered in my journal, but my thoughts seemed to slip away so easily. It's been a few days since I've written anything, I think. Or has it been a few weeks? I keep getting thirstier for soda. I'm glad the company lets us have free soda when we work. I keep looking up at the cameras for some reason, but I can't remember why. I read the words on these pages, but I don't remember writing them. I see a white van pull up. It must be a customer. It's nearly 3 a.m. I hope they come in before the power surge.
Well, my spookies, I'd say that was enough roadside misery to make anybody think twice about topping off the tank and taking the scenic route. That's what I love about this kind of horror. It doesn't need a castle or a graveyard to get under your skin. Sometimes all it takes is a busted tire, a lonely church, a patch of Ozark woods, or a miserable little gas station where the night shift lasts just a bit too long. The ordinary stuff is what makes it meaner. Because deep down we all know places just like these. We've passed them, we've even stopped at them, we've told ourselves they're harmless. Thank you for spending the evening out in the weeds with me. And make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast app, because every single Wednesday for 7 years, there's been a brand new scary story waiting just for you on the Weekly Spooky feed. Until next time, keep your headlights on, your tank above half, and your eyes off any road that seems to appear only when you're desperate enough to take it.